Welcome, lacrosse fans, to the Utah Lax Report podcast. I'm your host, Tim Haslam. This week on the site, you can see the boys and girls preseason coaches polls presented by Vessel Kitchen. Corner Canyon takes the top spot in the boys poll, while Park City takes the lead in the girls poll. The full poll results can be seen on the site utah.laxreport.substack.com. My interview this week is with Mark Stout. Stout has been a key part of the growth of lacrosse in Utah and was at the very first high school lacrosse meeting in 1994. We talk about the best players from Utah, BYU Lacrosse, and more. Hope you enjoy. Welcome to the show, Coach. How are you?
I'm good. Getting over a cold, but other than that, I'm feeling great.
Well, let's hope you get feeling better soon. I wanted to start out with just wondering, when did you start playing lacrosse?
I started playing lacrosse in high school in '75. Baltimore, Maryland, Woodlawn High School. Not a great powerhouse, but still there, still going. So.
You mentioned earlier in our conversation that we had before this that you continued on to junior college, went on an LDS mission, came back to the same junior college, and then in the fall of '81 ended up at BYU.
Yep. Catonsville Community College, 2 years of junior college, and then BYU in '81. Well, fall of '81, playing in '82 for the first time.
So what was it like back then? You know, the early '80s, you're on the campus of BYU. How many people, how many guys had heard of lacrosse before getting on campus?
Oh, my goodness. You'd walk around with a lacrosse stick, and it was about as alien at that point in time as walking around with Walkman headphones on. People thought you were from outer space. You're walking around with these little wire headphones on, and then the wire goes down into your backpack or your book bag or whatever, and then you add a lacrosse stick onto it, and you're the strangest guy on campus. And then you're trying to walk around, because you're from the East, you're trying to walk around in boat shoes with no socks, and you could get in trouble for that back then. So it was a little bit of a transition, but you meet some of your lifelong friends on a lacrosse team, on a field. And there are guys that I played with back then that I still communicate with on a regular basis. There's some we wish we knew where they had drifted off to, but there are still some that I communicate with, on a weekly, if not a monthly basis. So it was a wonderful time. We didn't have a lot of support from the university other than field space, a little bit of locker room space. We traveled in our own cars, and that continued until, was it 94, when we lost two players coming back from California. They rolled their car. 2 were injured, 2 were killed. University said, okay, you have to use university vehicles from now on. And then it's grown from then till now, where we use actually, the school pays for, the big lead buses, which is, the ultimate comfort if you're only traveling one day. Multiple days, then of course you just take those up to the airport and then fly wherever. But it certainly has changed over the years for the better, but you can't take away the experience we went through with trying to find gas money to get to or from a field. Got to have enough gas money to get there, got to have a little bit for food, got to have enough gas money to get back. And, you're talking about going to Southern California or Northern California or Phoenix or, places like that. So it's a couple of tanks of gas to get there and back and all that. But the camaraderie you gained, in those close quarters of, 4 or 5 guys to a car, you certainly can't beat that, really.
What were some of your favorite memories from playing back in those days? Was it a road trip? Was it a certain game? What kind of stands out still to this day?
We had a guy named Mark Etheridge. He was an ROTC guy, so he's at BYU, but I don't know if he had an apartment part of the time. He lived out of his van part of the time. He drove. We went to, I think, Phoenix, or we're playing down there at either Phoenix or the U of A. And he's a defenseman. he had one of those old spoons. Do you remember the spoon head? It went down really wide and then came in at the bottom. It was a horrible stick, and he had one of those. Anyway, we had 3 defensemen, so we threw him on attack because we had like literally 11 players. And somebody shot, hit the goalie in the chest. It comes dribbling out in front of him, and he kicks it in. And then he goes off on a celebration that today would have gotten him 1 minute. But he goes off on a celebration. He goes, "I'm a defenseman. I've never scored a goal in my life. You suck. I scored on you." You know, he's just in this goalie's face and everything else. And that's that. And by the way, on another road trip, his van, he had 2 other players in it. His van caught on fire. You know, so they had to pull over, put the fire out, and then keep going. You know, so. You know, those are memories that you'll never forget. You know, stuff like that, making the road trips, staying with families. I can remember staying in Ukaipa with one of the players' families, and he has since passed away. And it was like his dad was just phenomenal, and you know, had his own business and stuff like that. And they welcomed us, the whole team, into his one house. You know, and so. Yeah, stuff like that you'll never forget.
Definitely, those are fun times that you'll always remember. Let's fast forward maybe 10 years or so. It's the early to mid 90s. You were telling me beforehand. Basically, there was a meeting held in Sandy that established the high school league. You know, the early days of the Utah Lacrosse Association. Walk us through sort of that process and what went into organizing it.
So you had Jason Lamb and Marty Westcott playing at BYU, and Greg Saunders was the coach, but he was losing his eligibility status as a student, and so he had to return to Canada because he couldn't stay down here and work because he didn't have a green card. In that transition period, or just after that happened, somebody had called down to BYU and said, "Hey, we want to have a meeting. We want somebody from BYU or from Utah County." Both to represent, and those 3 guys, one of those 3 guys called and asked me to go, said they couldn't make it. Could I go? So I go to this meeting. It's February of 94. We're at the Sandy Chamber of Commerce there on 90th and State Street. Big conference table with 15 to 22 people around it. Mason's there running the meeting. I believe Dave Allen was there, probably maybe Brad Hawes and his dad, somebody from Sunnyside, maybe Mark Etheridge, Dave Allen, myself, and a few other people that I unfortunately can't remember who was there. But they said, we want to start a high school league. Right now, in 94, we have a Waterford team that was started as a PE program when Waterford was down here in Provo. And they continued it as they moved up to Salt Lake there in Sandy. And that team was playing a Salt Lake team that was coached by a bunch of the U of U, the Toulouse players that were associated with the U of U. And most of those players for that Salt Lake team were about to graduate. They were mostly seniors and a few juniors. And so with those 2 teams being already established, but one about to dissolve because of graduation, we were trying to preemptively kind of fill in with some other teams for a smooth transition to continue what they had started. And I started out of that meeting, I started a Utah County team. Mason started a Sandy team. Waterford already had a team. And then Sunnyside was the team that was kind of east, Rowland Hall, Judge area up by the zoo and the U. And then somebody did a Park City team. And in the fall of 94, we had a league. And then at the end of the league, we had a state championship, which I've sent you a picture of. And you can see the 5 teams and the coaches and guys from BYU and from other schools that were reffing for us. And, it just, that was the kind of the genesis of the ULA after the Waterford Salt Lake team the Salt Lake team graduated and it kind of ended. But that team also was the genesis for the Sunnyside team moving forward. So anyway, that's what happened in '94. That's where it started.
So from there, other teams just continued to build and form. You were saying earlier, you had to go out every year and recruit new teams, recruit new players, starting teams at the junior high level, all that. Did you ever imagine it would get to where it's at now?
Oh my goodness. I don't think we could have imagined how many teams there are now back then. Even from fall of '94 to spring of '95, my Utah County Warriors divided into Orem and Timpview respectively. So my team, just to backtrack a hair here, when I put up a flyer at Orem and I put up a flyer at Timpview, I had Pete Stevenson at Orem recruiting. You know Pete. And I had Stephen Heilner over at Timpview. And Stephen Heilner is Charlie and Billy Friedman's nephew. And he had moved here and was going there. And so we had like 10 kids from Timpview and 10 kids from Orem for that fall Utah County Warriors team. And then in the spring, they each divided and then recruited more kids for their own teams. But as time went on, as we were talking about earlier, unless you had a feeder program that somehow developed out of your high school team, like Waterford had, like Mason did in Sandy, you had teams that kind of went up and down. And a few years into this up and down, we decided to start a Utah County fall junior high league to fill all these teams. And at one time, I think we had 18 teams in the county. I know the first year we had like 12, and then it ballooned up to 16. I think at one point it was 18 teams. And Jason Lamb and I ran this. He got his players at BYU to coach, one or two players at every team. And those teams just fed into from the junior high into the high schools to kind of keep it going. And then as more parents got involved, they started doing their own coaching as well as, hey, let's get elementary schools to feed the junior high. And the teams that did the best have continued to produce at the high school level. The Sandys, the Brightons, the Binghams, Waterford, Judge. If you've got a good youth program, you're going to continue to have a good high school program. And so, but like you said, did we imagine it would get this far? I don't think any of us could have imagined the growth that we've seen over the 20-something years now. So we're not far away from 30 years. So that's amazing. It really is.
So when you think back to this meeting, in Sandy, you think back to this first league, do you ever get this sense of accomplishment? Do you feel a sense of pride in all of this? What are some of the things that you look back and are proud of?
The biggest sense of accomplishment or pride I get, I don't have any kids, as you know, but I do have nephews. And I do consider all the kids I've coached, whether at camp or club team or BYU or whatever, I consider to be, I consider myself to be an uncle, not a dad, but certainly an uncle. And the old adage where it takes a village to raise a kid, I'm certainly part of that village. I might be the village idiot, but I'm still part of the village. But to see these kids grow up, have kids of their own that they're now coaching, like Stephen Heilner there in American Fork, Skyridge area, to see Pete Stevenson graduate from BYU and then start coaching. First he started reffing, then he started coaching. To see other kids that I've coached be really good refs. Steve, oh gosh, what's Steve's last name? From Highland High School. He's one of the best refs in the state, if not the West. Guys like that gives me a little bit of a sense of pride to go, yeah, I coached him when he was little, and now look what he's doing. He's coaching or he's reffing at a high level. And so it does give me a sense of pride. And then, of course, my nephews and the kids that I've coached to get onto a Division I team at the U, to get onto a MCLA Division I team at BYU or UVU, Colorado, wherever they've decided to go. That's where my uncle pride comes in, and it's just, I sit back there and go, okay, he just scored and I taught him to do that. That's fun for me. And I've got a big, huge smile, sometimes almost tears coming out of my eyes. And I just sit there by myself and nobody knows except for me and the player, whoever it is. And that's where my sense of pride comes in, is watching where these kids have gone and are still continuing to go in lacrosse at various levels. So that's where my sense of pride comes in.
For the listeners out there who maybe don't know the ins and outs of the Stout family, you are the uncle of, Josh and Jake and Aaron and Zach and even Jesse, obviously. But,
I'm the uncle, yes. But I taught them how to play before their dad started coaching them.
Okay, yeah, no, I'll let you take credit for it for sure. Most people know Josh. He's probably the most well-known Stout brother. When did you get that sense that Josh was going to be something special?
Genesis of the family. Aaron Stout couldn't get into BYU, but he would come to camp. And I'm walking from one field to from one field to the next as a counselor. And I come up to the field, and Jason Lamb, who's running the whole program there, as well as the camps, I said, Jason, how's he doing? And he happened to be on the field we were watching. And he said about Aaron, he said, Aaron is the best defenseman out here. And this is 300 kids. What's that? Maybe 60 or 70 or 80 of them are defensemen. That's pretty good praise. I said, what does he need to work on? He said he needs to work on his foot speed, just as he gets beat from X. And the kid got he didn't score, but he got a shot. So Aaron ends up playing at the U, has a great time. Zach is the next kid in line, of course. And he decides to go to West Minnie, had a great program, had a great time there, ended up being one of the best defensive middies there at West Minnie. Then a couple years below that, you had Jake. Jake was something special, better than his older two brothers. Jake could go left-handed, could go right-handed, could play defense, could play offense. He was a real true two-way midi. Put him on the same team with Aaron Fjeldsted, and you had a pretty potent offense back then. I don't care who you were playing against. To control those two guys, one coming from attack, one coming from midfield, it was something special to watch those two guys play together in high school. A year or two later, you have them as juniors, and Josh comes in as a freshman. Josh's freshman year, he could go left, he could go right, was more of an attackman than a midi. But when the other guys, and he's a lefty, but those two guys, Aaron and Jake, would drive on one side of the goal, and Josh would sit at 10 and 10 on the opposite side. And as his defenseman sagged over, guess what? He is wide open. And Aaron, either a bing back to X and over to Josh, or a looping pass over the whole crease area, the hole. Josh would get it, and he would put it. He would take a couple steps in, get that goalie to face up, and he would put it in that bottom far corner. And as a freshman, he had 7 or 8 hat tricks in a row, benefiting mostly from being in the right spot and shooting well, but having Aaron and Jake double or triple teamed or whatever. So he grew as a shooter, like like nobody's business, and became, more of a pure shooter than even Jake was, and a good defender. And once in a while, the goalie would get a penalty and he'd get in the goal, because when he was little, he played defense. But a funny story, because he loved Aaron. Aaron was his oldest brother, and he kind of mimicked him growing up. And he got to organized lacrosse in my third, fourth grade. And they said, no, everybody has to use a short stick. And he had been using a long pole since second grade, like a full length long pole, and could swing it around pretty good. So anyway, they made him use a short stick. He kind of converted to midi and then to attack as time went on. But he played every position: defense, LSM, got in the goal when he was younger. He'd get in the goal and his brothers would shoot on him, and was actually a pretty good goalie. I can remember one time in high school, goalie gets a penalty, gets a 2-minute roughing penalty, or unsportsmanlike or something like that. And Josh has to get in the goal without a chest protector, switch to the goalie's helmet, and I'm on the far sideline in the coach's box, and I could hear him barking orders more than I could hear the defenseman barking orders. So he instinctively he just knew, and he was loud, and he was vocal, and he was talented enough to play any position you put him in. I mean, look at the U. Had him at attack, and then his last season he was at midfield, would draw a double team, which benefit other guys on the backside, to score and everything else. So it was pretty apparent as a freshman that he was going to be something special and a pure shooter, pure scorer. Whereas like I said, Jake and Aaron Fjeldsted, they were pretty special in their own right, running both ways, playing offense, playing defense. But those three guys, there's not a better trio to put on a team, in my opinion.
That's probably enough content for a whole nother podcast that maybe we'll get into later. Tell me though, real quick, I have two questions for you. The first is, one of the first times I met you, we were talking about lacrosse, obviously, as we do, and you mentioned that you used to sell STX lacrosse gear just out of the trunk of your car back in the 90s. Tell us about that experience.
So we started in 94, right? And Mason Goodhand had a friend, Joseph, can't remember Joseph's last name, who worked at STX, who was about to retire. I mean, he's an older gentleman. And he called him up and he says, hey, we need some sticks for our league. Sent out boxes of sticks that ended up being in whoever needed one's hand for 94. And then, Mason, you talk about selling stuff out of your basement. Mason had more than I did in his basement. He had all the league gear. At one point, I think all the goals, we'd collect the goals at the end of the season for all the fields. We put them on. Anyway, this Joseph guy sent out these boxes of sticks for us to start doing the league. In 95, I called and said, hey, Joseph, I would like to sell your gear out here. Can you set me up with an account? They were gracious enough to do that, and stuff came in, ended up in my basement because I didn't have anywhere else. I didn't have a warehouse or anything. Stuff ended up in Mason's basement, my basement. I had a cousin with a bike store in Orem. He gave me one wall. I have a picture of that somewhere where it says STX, and it has heads, and it has shafts, and it has gloves, and just the bare necessities, arm pads and shoulder pads. And that was kind of the genesis of selling stuff here representing STX since 95, 94 if you count the gift they sent us, but actually selling it and having an account with them since, I believe, 95. So I had kids come over and buy stuff out of the trunk of my car, my basement. I'd meet them at a school. I'm pretty sure that parents were wondering if we were dealing drugs because it looked clandestine, I'm sure, but it was all on the up and up, and it was just to promote the game. I mean, I can't imagine how much stuff I've given out for rental, given out for, hey, use this for the season and return. That's never come back. I imagine well over $10,000 worth of stuff that's out there that is mine, that I've lent to somebody. I can remember an old red Bacharach helmet that I never got back, but I used that when I was at junior college because our colors back there were red and black, and I brought that out with me, and now who knows where it is. It's on a shelf at a Play It Again somewhere.
Man, wouldn't that be something to track down that helmet? That would be something else. Add it back to your collection. That would be great. You've watched the game in Utah since its inception. Who's your top 5 players to ever come out of Utah?
Oh my goodness. Okay, from Utah, I got to give the nod to Josh, and number 2 for Maryland, Bubba. Josh and Bubba Fairman. Josh Stout and Bubba Fairman, the top 2. Next 2, I think, would be Jake Stout, Aaron Fjeldsted. Then you've got, is it Mayer? Meyer went to Towson years ago. He's got to be up there. He stayed back there, and I think he's actually a policeman or a sheriff or something in Baltimore County there. But he went to Towson. So that would probably be my top 5 honorable mentions. You've got little 32 from Bountiful, played for the U. Cam, little Cam, Chris Belcher, Elliot Groh. Elliot Groh is one of the best players to come out of Utah. Gosh, trying to think of who else played with Elliot. Jordan Harris. He's from Denver though. So, but there's been some fantastic players over the years. Steve Austin came and played for us from at BYU, played for Army, got married. You can't be married and play, so he transferred out to BYU. Steve Austin, pound for pound, one of the strongest and best athletes I've ever known. I mean, at Army, you box, you fence, you play lacrosse, you play football, you play track, so those guys were exposed to like every sport you can imagine. And this is a kid that excelled at most of them. And, he'd grip your hand and about crush you. It could have crushed you if you wanted to, but the kid would practice without elbow pads on. I mean, the kid was an animal. So, he'd probably be in my top 5 as well. Although not really a kid from Utah, but played here, along with Elliot. So I don't know, that's a pretty good list. I know I'm probably forgetting somebody. Chandler Westcott. What a phenomenal player. I mean, can you imagine having Dallin Hampshire in goal, Chris Belcher on the wing, and an attack that was made up of Chandler Westcott, Bubba Fairman, and Josh Stout? Holy cow, they didn't lose to anybody. I don't care if it was in Boston, Philadelphia, or in Denver for the World Games. They didn't lose to anybody. I mean, holy cow, what a trio that would have been, to watch or to be a part of. I was unfortunate enough to never see them play together, but because I couldn't make the road trip. But anyway, I mean, those are 3 phenomenal players right there that playing together were unstoppable. So there's been some great players come out of the state, and I hope that will continue. We hope to continue to put them into, D1, D2, D3, MCLA D1, anywhere across the country. And it is fun to see kids, with the club teams around, whether it's True or whether it's Wasatch, and Wasatch does a good job of promoting where their players they've had on their team have gone or go. It's fun to see those posts. So, and hopefully it continues.
I want to thank you, Mark, for your time today. I really appreciate you coming on the show. I'm sure we could go on for hours, and maybe we will, this summer or something, but I appreciate your time, and I'm sure we'll see you on the sidelines.
Well, hopefully you can send that picture that I sent you along with it, and people can get a kick out of that, and, kind of the starting point. And hopefully there's some guys that listen to your podcast that can see themselves in that picture. Scotty Clarke or Clint Fjeldsted or Andy Stockman, who's up in Spokane, of course, Mason and Dave Allen and those guys that were in there. Chris Rader, who's in Spokane, Vancouver, Washington, is in that picture. Pete Stevenson's in that picture. Stephen Heiler's in that picture. I'm in that picture, you know. So anyway, hopefully guys get a real kick out of finding themselves in that picture, and everybody else gets a kick out of where it started. So thanks for having me. It's been fun.